can't have a NES list and not have a SNES list, can we? Just like not having SNES means that this group of lists of games featuring all my favourite consoles is incomplete. The SNES was my first Nintendo machine back in 1992, and really while I probably played more SNES games through the old rental shop than I did through having them, it and the old Mega Drive got as much time as each other. It's still quite a special machine and still my favourite Nintendo console by far. So the same rules apply as ever. We've got my favourite 50 SNES games coming up, I'll be crowing about them for a minute or so each, we'll see some gameplay, and there'll no doubt be some unconventional choices in there that you wouldn't normally see on any other person's list. That's just how I roll after all. So yeah, let's do this already. The number 50 game is actually quite an apt way to start. Jurassic Park for me is kind of the epitome of a rental game. I would have never actually wanted to buy this title for various reasons, but I did rent it quite a lot as it's pretty perfect for that. Yes, Ocean's Jurassic Park is flawed in many areas, despite being by far their most ambitious movie tie-in. The game is stupidly unforgiving and will happily kill you immediately if you dare stray off the expected path, and those first-person segments haven't exactly aged brilliantly. These flaws are all pretty noticeable now, and it's clear that Sega's more straightforward action platformer is the far superior game in every way. As a child who loved dinosaurs and Jurassic Park, however, the promise of being able to explore the place, somewhat, in this game was very alluring and kept me going back, at least for another couple of nights a time. Here's the SNES's own Mickey Mouse game. Now of course Mickey Mouse was far better suited to the Sega, that's just obvious really. But Magical Quest isn't a slouch. It is a lot like a 16-bit version of all the classic 8-bit Capcom platformers, with quite the similar feel about it. Such games take a bit of a backseat on the SNES compared to platformers that are a bit less of a throwback in their design, but the SNES has still got the odd cracker line about, and this is a good one even if you'd be silly to pit it against Castle of Illusion or whatever. Shoot-em-ups on the SNES tend to get a bit of a bad rap sometimes, mainly from people like me who are comparing them to Sega's shmup collection. It's easy to exaggerate the presence of slowdown and what have you. But the SNES is home to some awesome shmups, and it's the only place where you could find R-Type's excellent sequels. Super R-Type is a fearsome brute, the sort of bastard shmup that takes you back to the very start of the bloody stage even if you die on the boss. But the classic play, complete with all the charging and weapons and careful guidance you can eat, is still there, and it does set up for something even better later on. Top Gear 2's up next, for a nice little bit of racing action. Seeing as this is from the same guys who did the Lotus games that are so bloody good on Amiga, it's not exactly a shock that this one's awesome. It's pretty similar with more focus on doing laps as opposed to beating arcade countdowns, there's the same great playability and the same fantastic Barry Leach music. These games were quietly the best races you could get on 16 bits, and there's quite a clear line from this game to excellent modern revivals like Horizon Chase Turbo. Gremlin, Magnetic Fields and Kemco all did a brilliant job here. UN Squadron. While it's a shame that the game's even better sequel, the utterly stunning Carrier Airwing, never really left the arcade, I've certainly got a lot of time for UN Squadron on SNES. It is one of the system's first shooters, and as such there's going to be a bit of the old slowdown when things get really going, but that does also mean the action is quite a big rush throughout with lots of things to blast and enemies to avoid, while also keeping your planes chock full of weapons and upgraded for the next battle. Capcom did a lot here to make a proper home version of the game, rather than just converting the arcade to the SNES, and it was definitely worth it. It's time for an isometric racer, and it's also time for Konami's first appearance on the list. And of course, it will not be the last. SNES and Konami, like SNES and Capcom, are simply matches made in heaven, and they're going to be all over every inch of this list. Anywho, this is the really cool and underrated Biker Mice from Mars, a racer made for a relatively short-lived but well-remembered cartoon, and one that's got all you want from one of these games. It's the sort of thing where there's so many power-ups and weapons that it's easy to go from first to last, and then back to first in a single lap. The action can get pretty mad. Sometimes it's hard to even stay on the track, in fact. It's a bit of a riot, and just the thing you'd want for a tie-in to this bodacious series. And hey, how about another Konami game? This is, of course, AXELAY. It's another pretty early SNES shooter, and it's the one that is the Mode 7 fest, going all about with sprite rotation and zoom in to make something that's quite similar to the likes of Sylpheed. Easy? Not on your Nelly. Good? Definitely. Even if it might take a few tries to get used to a rather different viewpoint, it's a shoot 'em up with a lot to love about it once you get into its flow, and it goes with some cracking music too. Here's something different. By far the most recent addition to the top 50, coming courtesy of the latest Japanese wrestling games video. FUNAKIMASAKATSU Hybrid Wrestler is as close to a Fire Pro beta as you're going to find on here. It looks cracking, it's got all the moves including stuff like springboard moves that you don't really see in any other 16-bit wrestling title, and it's incredibly easy to pick up and play, way more so than Fire Pro is. It goes without saying that the influence of Fire Pro takes that game up further in this list, of course, but this game is the absolute best wrestling title on the system that isn't named Fire Pro. Meanwhile, in the West, we were stuck with WWF Royal Rumble and WCW Super Brawl. Jealousy intensifies. If there is one thing that's regrettable about Super Ghouls and Ghosts, is that you wish it had come out for the SNES a couple of years later than when it did, if only because it might have lacked the slowdown that's so often present in early SNES titles, and does have a fair bit of effect here. Otherwise, yeah, this is obviously great. An all-new sequel to Arthur's previous adventures where he's learnt how to double jump, his golden armour is more valuable than ever, and the game goes to many places where the series had yet to tread. You'll still have to do it all twice if you want to win, mind you. Once again, the presence of ghouls and ghosts on the system sets up for something even more epic later on in the list. Arkanoid! It's here, it's Arkanoid, and well, it's the same juiced up breakout action you've long come to expect. But it's always nice to see from Taito. As a sequel of sorts, Do It Again doesn't try to reinvent the wheel or anything like that, and is mostly just like its predecessors. But then, Arkanoid is a hell of a lot of fun. An almost relaxing game of high difficulty, especially when you actually get into a sort of zone with it. Of course, it's easy for that zone to break, usually when a power-up suddenly tempts you away from watching the ball and you realise all too late that you're not going to make it back to that ball in time. It should be so simple to just hit the ball back and forth, but greed is unquestionably your greatest enemy. That's the hidden secret behind this legendary game's appeal, really. Silicon and Synapse make the first of 3 appearances in this top 50, and it's another isometric racer, their excellent rock and roll racing. The appeal of this one is obviously quite similar to Biker Mice from Mars. It's wild, there's lots of power-ups that make you feel as though you're never really out of a race, it's a lot of quite casual fun. Presentation is what gives it the edge, of course. This is the stunner with a Micro Machines-esque squad of memorable characters, a bunch of commentary, and killer tunes. When you've got the likes of Paranoid or Highway Star pumping out of the SNES's sound chip, that's definitely going to make this game the kin of the 16-bit isometric racers. That's for damn sure.
Rip jams into first. Rip fades into last.
Capcom are back once again, and this time it's with another Disney tie-in, the quite different and pretty cool Goof Troop. While this game is very clearly designed with 2 players in mind, it's still quite fun with the single player. There's a little bit of puzzling, a little bit of exploration, and a little bit of careful timing as you try and bash those enemies with your blocks and other assorted items before they catch up with you. Block moving games like this are always quite appealing to me, and Goof Troop's variety gives it a nice edge as opposed to it being just a puzzle or an action game. Batman Returns, as good a film as it is, represents a rather mixed bunch of tie-ins. A miserable effort on the Mega Drive for Sunsoft, some actually interesting attempts on the 8-bit consoles, a better Mega CD title where you could just focus on the driving, a shambolic and unfinished Amiga game. But it's quite clear that Konami's beat 'em up on the SNES smashes the lot of them. It may not be the most imaginative approach, but a Batman beat 'em up from the guys who utterly ruled the roost when it came to licensed tie-in beat 'em ups? This is such an obvious winning formula. It's no real surprise that Batman Returns is great. It's not quite Konami's best beat 'em up on the system, but it's not all that far behind. We have some sport next. There's only a couple of timeless sports games this time around, oddly less than there were for the NES list, but the 2 that are here are great, and Super Tennis is still one of the best emulations of the sport nearly 30 years after it originally came out. It shouldn't be all that hard to do tennis, really. Hell, video games started by emulating tennis, so how come so many managed to screw it up? This one doesn't. It's got all the shots, of course, but it's also got a varied set of opponents, and a pretty challenging AI that's always going to give you a bit of a test, no matter how good you get at the game. And of course it's got that little bit of kind of unnecessary, but still welcome Mode 7 flashiness that you should expect out of an early SNES title. Brilliant little game.
Play.
It's a game by a human, it's got fire in the title, but it's actually not Fire Pro. At least not yet. This is The Firemen, a rather odd top-down game that only saw a Western release in Europe. Japan does seem to have this thing for action-packed titles based around being a fireman, and while it might be odd to see conflagrations that are essentially sentient or moving around in patterns, you get used to it pretty quickly. And here in The Firemen they're the basis for an excellent top-down game, much in the same vein of something like Gremlins 2. The frequent chatter helps too as your team continues to battle their way through this skyscraper. Sure beats playing Fahrenheit or watching Backdraft, doesn't it? Capcom once again, Disney once again, and it's Aladdin. Now, my heart will very clearly always be with Sega's Aladdin game. For me, that's obviously going to be the better title. But in no way does that mean this game is bad. In fact, Capcom's Aladdin is really good and, if anything, a wee bit underrated. What I really enjoy here is how acrobatic good old Prince Ali is. The fun in this game is seeing just how often you can vault on everything from enemies to platforms and even power-up containers. Here at Kim Towers we love platformers where speedy and flashy play is generally rewarded, and Aladdin's got a nice bit of a line in that. In the end, both this and the Mega Drive title are really good. Smash TV is one of the greatest arcade games of all time, and naturally it got ported to quite literally everything. Seriously, you can even play the game on ZX Spectrum, if you really wanted to. It fails there, as it generally failed on every other platform, but certainly not on SNES. This is brilliant. I suppose the reason is obvious. The SNES has the perfect control pad for the game, meaning that playing it is dead simple. Certainly much better than playing it on Mega Drive. I mean, it would take 25 more years for a crack Squadron to create a superb smash matching arena shooter experience for your Mega Drive, that being Xeno Crisis. But Super Smash was the champion for a long time. It just completely nailed the legend.
Big money! Big prizes! I love it!
Just 2 entries ago, I spoke of how I love platforms where you can be flashy. And really, it's hard to look past HAGANE for flashiness. This is another one of those poster children for rare and brilliant SNES games. It was only ever available in the West as an exclusive in Blockbusters, and as such it's quite expensive. But yeah, it's very cool. Our hero here has an utterly ridiculous arsenal of moves. Multiple weapons, dodging, dashing, smart bombs, double jumps, a wall jump screw attack, elongated acrobatic super attacks. There's so much coolness. It's a real joy to play this game as ridiculous and as flashy as you possibly can, although this is obviously what ends up getting you in trouble. You do something stupid and you get hit or killed or fall into a pit or whatever. Still an utterly magic title, mind you. The soon-to-be Blizzard boys are back again, and this is most definitely their most famous 16-bit title. We all love the Lost Vikings, a trio of Norse marauders taken completely out of their time, all of which have a very specific and necessary skill. Swift can jump all over the shop, Baliog has his sword and bow, and Olaf's shield could deflect a cruise missile. You're going to need all of them to get through just about every stage and avoid a Viking funeral, of course, but the absolute ton of character that the game has is what takes it from being just a really good puzzle platformer into a work of genius. Now I suppose that this is the main odd entry in this list. SimCity 2000? Really? People would probably accept the original SimCity on SNES, because that was pretty acclaimed, but this certainly wasn't. So, hear me out. Back in the mid-90s, I wanted to play SimCity 2000 for the longest time. I saw it in magazines and it was utterly bedazzling. But I didn't have a PC, and my bog standard Amiga 1200 just wasn't up to playing it, because I think you needed a hard drive, didn't have one. So eventually I turned to this version. And sure, it doesn't exactly look an awful lot like the computer version, it's more than a little pared down, but as far as playability goes, it's still a SimCity game, meaning that it's endlessly addictive. I loved this game back then and played it for many hours, and you know what? As a console conversion, I think it still holds up nicely. I can still spend a bit of time constructing a city here. While it is no surprise that this got nowhere at all in 1995, I think it's perfectly good. Here's a pretty cool game that I don't think is too well known. Fire Striker. Another game that's very much designed with multiplayer in mind, but works just fine in single player. Fire Striker is a different sort of take on the Breakout formula, quite similar to the also rather underrated Devilish the Next Possession on Mega Drive. You move your fella around the screen as opposed to just on the bottom, and smash your ball as much as possible, trying to get to the next screen before the balls and enemies take you down. There's also things like boss battles and lots of power-ups to be had, and it all makes for a really excellent title that I've seen very few people talk about. I highly recommend this one as a good old-fashioned Metal Jesus Rocks standard hidden gem. We've had some cool shooters so far, but when the almighty compile comes roaring into view, it's safe to say that things kick up a notch. Space Megaforces, of course known as Super Elite in other parts of the world, and is another very cool entry in Compile's complex power-up and lots of spectacular weapons type series, with big death ray lasers a particular speciality. Is it quite the perfection of blazing lasers? Maybe not, but it's well up there with the other released titles like Musha and Power Strike, and as with most every compile shooter playing it is, in the words of the late great Robert Palmer, simply irresistible. Jeez, that was a bad one. It's so bad that I've had to put "that was a bad one" into the bloody script. Anyway, it was as bad as this game is really good.
Multiple shots.
It is obvious that we'd be seeing a couple of Donkey Kong Country games on this list. They're pretty high up there with the system's best platformers, at least in my opinion. As far as Euro platformers go with all their various idiosyncrasies, they're amongst the best, and I still appreciate the old pre-rendered look that the games have, even if not everybody is necessarily a fan. DKC2 here is generally the one that's regarded as the best, although I did spend an awful lot more time with the first game back in the day, and so naturally that's going to be higher. Not that I would argue too hard with anyone who says that DKC2 improves on the original a great deal, with more creative levels and plenty more little secrets to be found. It's a jolly good one. Certainly better than DKC3 at any rate. And now, here's an appearance by Kirby. I don't have an awful lot of experience with the little pink ball of plumptitude. In fact, this is shockingly the only Kirby game I've actually played, and it's not even one of his main games. Kirby's Dream Course is this very odd little perverse take on mini-golf where you hit our hero very hard and try to knock out all the enemies before getting the ball in the hole. He does have a few power-ups to help him along at various times, but generally you're going to be relying on your ability to correctly plan and judge a shot, just like any other good golf game. As you would expect with Kirby, the presentation is ridiculously cute and jolly, and the game itself is just as good. I probably ought to play more of this little fella's main games. We're very much staying in the cute arena for this next one. Konami's awesome TIKKYOU OSHABERI PARODIUS is one of the best shoot-em-ups on the system, and a bloody brilliant late system title. Now I have to confess that I'm not too big on a lot of Konami's shooters. I'm honestly not a massive fan of Gradius at all. But when you truss it up in weird Japanese cuteness that allows you to play as a penguin, shout obscenities at enemies, and become really fat and destroy everything in your path, all while there's some crazed commentary in the bargain, and that's a game I can most definitely get behind. The Parodius series represents some of the most outlandish and hilarious shoot-em-up fun you can have, and this is definitely the best of them. But enough of cuteness. It's time for a big tonal shift, and it doesn't get any harder than going from Parodius to Silicon and Synapse's Blackthorne, or Black Hawk if you're in Europe. For me, this is the SNES's premier entry into one of my favourite genres, the good old cinematic platformer. You can play Flashback on here of course, but to me that's better suited to the Mega Drive, whereas Blackthorne, that's one for the SNES. Thoroughly moody and grim, you play as a badass hero with a shotgun. He's so badass that he can shoot things without even looking at them. Aside from the usual trappings of the cinematic platformer, the cover-based shootouts and puzzling make this a definite hit. One of those games I could happily play for a good long while. There are a few games on this list that, shock of horrors, I haven't actually completed. However, I've certainly played enough of them to deem them worthy of a spot, even if playing through them would definitely give them a higher ranking. We'll be seeing some famous RPGs along these lines, as well as this one here. Mega Man X. As mentioned before, I don't have a lot of Mega Man XP as I never used to be a fan, but I am growing to enjoy the games an awful lot more. From my somewhat basic understanding of the X games and their differences to the regular Mega Man games, these are a fair bit darker in tone and they tend to chuck a few more abilities our heroes' way. Lots of charging, lots of dashes, apparently you can even do a Hadouken. It's all quite relentless, and there's lots to do. I need to really properly sit down with it someday and give it my completely undivided attention, clearly. ACTRAISER, one of the system's first games, and for a first game it is kind of an odd one. You play as a god, and while you've got some very fun action stages to play through, complete with Yuzo Koshiro's excellent soundtrack and all that, you've also got those rather odd interludes where you help the people build up their settlement and do away with those evil spirits for good. Honestly, I prefer the straight action mode these days, but this is some truly excellent action. It's just a bit of a shame that the sequel was a bit of a sluggish stinker, as we could have really done with some more ACTRAISER games. It's time for another sports game, and this time we go into good old-fashioned football, and a 16-bit footy game that's actually worth playing along with sensible soccer. ISS Deluxe has certainly held up better than the early 16-bit FIFA games. It's a lot smoother, looking a fair bit like a more arcadey game, but quite a bit deeper than your football champs or super sidekicks. You've got presentation that still holds up, which isn't always the case with a sports title, and the match play is still quite hot. Even if the commentary is rather cheesy, it's nice to even have it at this time. Konami seem to like having commentary in their SNES games. I have to say that honestly, it's even fun to just go into the bloody free practice mode and screw around a little with this game, happily heading the ball back and forth, piggy in the middle style. Lovely stuff. We're starting to get more and more serious. CYBERNATOR is here now, also known as Assault Suits Vulcan and one of the all-time great mech games. Sure as hell beats out Target Earth on the Mega Drive in any case. I mean, that game's not too bad, but this is just a huge improvement. It can be a little tricky to get to grips with mecha games sometimes, to know what weapon's going to be best for a situation, master all the moves you've got, and not just dumbly rush into a situation because you're in a gigantic robot and you feel invincible, only to then get pelted by a million shots and die in record time. CYBERNATOR is one of the best introductions out there to a pretty tricky subgenre, more than worthy of a spot this high up. Okie dokie, it's time to start the top 20. And again, even if I've not played this game all the way through, and I most certainly will someday, a SNES list would just be incomplete without it. Now I suppose that begs the question, why haven't I played Final Fantasy VI, or 3, or whatever, all the way through? Sometimes I'm just a bit foolish, I suppose. I start something, have a lot of fun for a good few hours, and then for whatever reason my attention span goes and before I know it I've moved on to something else. By the time I go back I've kind of forgotten everything and need to start again. Do I have some sort of block when it comes to lengthy RPGs? Perhaps. I have little doubt that if I played this through it would be easily in the top 10 or higher. Konami are here for yet another entry in the list, and it's another game that's a kind of obvious inclusion in a SNES list. I almost get the feeling that people think of Turtles in Time as more of a SNES game than it is an arcade conversion, weirdly enough. It just fits on this platform so well, and although I do also enjoy Hyperstone Heist on the Mega Drive, this is better. Probably because you can't throw people into the screen in Hyperstone Heist, something that quite simply never gets old in this game right here. This is without question the best Turtles game, even better than the original arcade and quite possibly Konami's greatest beat 'em up of them all, which is saying quite a lot. And now it's time for the system's best shooter, and this one can happily match up to near enough anything on the Mega Drive. That's a tall statement, but R-Type 3 is just that damn good. The R-Type series is pretty damn famous, of course, but I don't know, I'm not sure if IRM really nailed the concept of just what R-Type was supposed to be until this game. The third Lightning feels like the one where they just got it absolutely right. The focus on charging shots, the often quite mazy stages, the weapons that are usually a little bit different from just giving you tons of power in the front. R-Type 3 nails the whole lot, and it's by far my favourite entry in the series. It does all the usual things that a good shmup does, giving you that adrenaline rush and all that, but R-Type 3 does it in quite a different and very welcome way. I said many entries ago that Super Ghouls and Ghosts set the scene for something even better on here. Now I suppose that's not the whole truth. You also have the old Gargoyles Quest spin-off titles to thank for the gothic legend that is Demon's Crest. Those games were pretty damn good, but this is a whole different level for Firebrand. It's certainly very Super Nintendo. Now, that's a bit of an obtuse statement, but I can't really imagine this game being on anything else. Like, if it was a Mega Drive title, it wouldn't have been the same. There's a certain type of very atmospheric and very open platformer that only really works on this platform. You can probably guess what the signature example of this game is, of course. But even if Demon's Crest isn't quite as open as a Metroid title, it's pretty close in feel. In the last video, when I did the NES list, I said that Super C was my favourite Contra game. And I have to say that wasn't something I put down without thinking about it. It's really close between that game and this one. Contra, or again, Probotector if you're European, doesn't lose anything in 16 bits. I suppose the only real issue here is that those Mode 7 horrific top-down stages are, yeah, they're not all that great really. That's the only reason why I'd have picked Super C as my favourite. The classic Contra action, however, my goodness. Just how bloody good is this? It's all that you could ever really want in a Contra game, and even if there have been some other superb entries in the series or in its spin-offs after this one, this more classic early Contra is still hard to top. I wouldn't say that kart racing games are amongst my favourites, and I'm not all that big of a fan of the rest of the Mario Kart series, but the original Super Mario Kart? Absolutely fantastic, and my favourite in the series by far. Why this one? I don't know. Maybe because it doesn't have that annoying blue shell? That certainly counts for a lot. This is just the one that I always had the most fun with. I love all the power-ups in this, the satisfaction that comes with a perfectly aimed shell or a perfectly timed mushroom that gets you from the middle of the pack to first place right at the end of a race. Other entries in the series may look way flashier, but this is multiplayer racing fun in its purest form. And now, of course, it's time for Fire Pro. After years of cruddy 16-bit wrestling games, I finally came across this in the early 2000s, coinciding perfectly with my newfound love for ProRes, and it was a complete revelation. A classic, deep, timing-based system, and matches that actually felt like proper wrestling matches you'd see in real life, with a huge roster chock full of all my new favourites. The Misawas, Kawadas, Kabashis, Jushin Thunder Ligers, they're all here. You don't even have to play this if you don't want to. You can just watch the computer go at it and still have fun, because the simulation of wrestling is that bloody good. The first game I played in a series that, since then, I've dedicated thousands of hours to. It is essential for any wrestling fan. The original Ninja Warriors had a thoroughly killer soundtrack, but it was a little simplistic and more gimmicky, best remembered for having 3 screens more than anything else. The SNES game is a different matter. Also known as the Ninja Warriors again, it's more single-plane beat-em-up action, but with tons more moves and the gameplay kicked up by several dozen notches at least. The result? Best beat-em-up on the system by a country mile. The greatness of the game has further been proved by a Switch-only sequel that people seem to absolutely adore, and I wish I could play. It doesn't even need to look all that different to this SNES game, because this game was already brilliant enough. I know, before you start completely having my life in the comments, that me not playing Chrono Trigger all the way through is basically a capital crime. I'm sorry about that. I know that if I had played this game all the way through, it would be way higher even than number 12. That what I have played of the game is enough for it to be this high up says a lot about how great it is. Everyone is clearly right about that. One day I will right the wrong. For now, even my simple recollections of what I have played, thinking about Secret of the Forest, the rather different battle system, that on its own is enough for the game to get very high indeed. I suppose that Star Fox, or of course Star Win if you're in my neck of the woods, looks like a fair bit of old hat now. All that super effects stuff that was hyped up so much, and we have a game that's mostly bare polygons and doesn't even run all that fast. But none of that technical stuff matters too much when playing the game, because even if it is basically a rail shooter, it's still a wonderful blast into the cosmos. It wowed me when I was younger because I'd never had anything in the home that was close to like it before, and I still love it now because the blasting, dodging and barrel rolling has actually held up pretty damn well, regardless of concerns about the graphics or the speed. And we can't forget about the secrets either, like the first time I discovered a black hole, or even managing to go out of the dimension. I will always have plenty of time for Star Fox. I suppose we're sticking with technical showcases for this next one. The early title PILOTWINGS is primarily designed as a Mode 7 showcase. One definite purpose that the game has is to be shown on monitors in shops and to show off all this fancy rotation and zoom in stuff the system can do. And yet PILOTWINGS is also perfectly great as a game simply because it is such a soothing and relaxing and comforting experience. A great simulation without having the ridiculous amounts of controls you'll usually find in a simulation. All a game's rule. The parachute section that was such a staple of games TV shows, the light plane, the rocket belt, even the hand gliding once you get used to controlling it. It's kind of a shame that a PILOTWINGS game didn't become something of a standard, a game that demonstrated what the new system could do, while also actually being very, very bloody good. Ah, jeez. Is Mario ever going to top one of these lists already? You'd think that arguably the most famous video game character of them all would have a pretty good shot of doing it, especially on his home turf. But Super Mario World only gets to number 9. Now, weirdly enough, I never actually played this when I was younger. My SNES didn't come with Super Mario World, it came with Street Fighter 2. I played it later on, and, well yeah, it's obviously a fantastic Mario game. Not only that, it's one that's absolutely chock full of secrets, far more than any other Mario game had been. Class like this is always going to be there, no matter when you actually get around to playing the game through. But, yeah, it's only number 9. Sorry. Amusingly enough, a lot of what I said about PILOTWINGS could apply to F-Zero, even if they're very different games. This is another one that's very much got the Games Shop monitor in mind. Look how fast this game is! Sure is a lot smoother than anything on the Mega Drive thanks to that Mode 7, isn't it? And again, if F-Zero was nothing but a technical showcase, it wouldn't be all that much to shout about. But no, all the speed and Mode 7 is in service of a classic. Breakneck tracks with death-defying leaps, endless savage twists and turns, and a racing game soundtrack that for me is perhaps only beaten by Outrun. Such was the case with this game and indeed every other F-Zero game. They're all brutally hard of course, but they're just so much of a rush. Even if failure happens quite often, and even if sometimes that failure can be the result of some bullshit involving those bloody moving chicane back markers you have to always dodge, you just dust everything off and go again. And here is the entire reason why I just had to get a SNES in the first place. There was no doubt about it. For a time at least, SNES was the only way you could play Street Fighter 2 in the home. And sure, I could have gone with any one of the excellent sequels. Street Fighter 2 Turbo is great, Super Street Fighter 2 is great. Hell, Street Fighter Alpha 2 is a thoroughly credible effort even on a system that's way underpowered for it. Not number 7, but still good. But I played none of those on the SNES as much as I played the original World Warrior. Street Fighter 2 in the home was everything I hoped it would be. I didn't have another SNES game for months and months, but it didn't matter. I played it to death and managed to get the proper ending game for every one of the characters. Despite that, I'm still actually not that good at Street Fighter to this day. This may well have been surpassed by many other games in the series, but World Warrior was where it all got started.
Fire! Yo, that fire! Sonic boom! Sonic boom! Yo, that fire! Yo, that fire!
I know that some people may be shocked to see the original Donkey Kong Country up so high. A lot of people do seem to think that this one just hasn't held up well at all. Either you don't care for that very 90s pre-rendered look, which for sure hasn't exactly aged as well as a regular well-made sprite has. You may wonder how the hell list gets so high when most everybody thinks DKC2 has much better design across the board. For many, DKC1 is just too simple, or it relies too much on those bloody minecart or other assorted track stages for its difficulty. And yet, only a bit of this high ranking is down to nostalgia. While this was a definite must-have at Christmas in 1994, which usually was the only time I could get a new SNES game, it has to be said, I still love playing the original DKC. Did it deserve to make Rare such a darling, at least for a short while? Maybe not, but maybe it is that little special place I have in my heart for the Euro platformer, despite its failings, that makes me love DKC and think that it's just about the best of them. I suppose the David Wise soundtrack also has a lot to do with it, but flawed or not, this will always make me smile. So, now we get into the top 5, and, well, it's all very close from here on out. As you might expect, the big N itself is going to dominate proceedings. It'll be no surprise for me to say that 4 out of the 5 slots here belong to Nintendo, because they're kind of good at making games. Games like this, the greatest of all the Zeldas in the opinion of this person here who hasn't actually played most of them. I suppose at least there aren't too many folks who'd disagree with that. Link's 16-bit outing is pretty bloody high up there, isn't it? I barely need to say a thing when so many people have bestowed this with greatest of all time status. It has everything you could ever want from one of these adventures. There will probably be people shouting and going all gun-ho about this game not being number 1, but whatever. The World Warrior, Christmas 92, Donkey Kong Country, Christmas 94, and Super Mario All-Stars was Christmas 93. The first time I'd really got to play the Mario games that everyone raved about so much. I didn't have a NES when I was growing up after all. Now sure, I do know that the versions of the games on Mario All-Stars aren't exactly the same as the originals, just with a graphical upgrade. There are odd little differences. Still, it's not like I knew anything about those differences back then. To me, this was the first time that I played and beat Mario 1, 2, 3, and even the Lost Levels. This was before the KART came with Super Mario World, by the way. And of course, I loved every single one of them. Those games with the fat plumber that people had shouted about for years, even sometimes in the ear of me, the die-hard Sega and Sonic fan who would happily get into any Sega versus Nintendo argument. Yeah, they were absolutely as brilliant as everyone said they were. Shocking, right? In the last SNES list, the biggest shock for most people was undoubtedly a total lack of a little game called Metroid. I tried with that game, I really did, but it's tough to get into if you didn't play it back in the day. Mind you, I didn't actually play Super Metroid back in the day either. That came much later, sometime in the early 2010s, when I finally decided to see just what the bloody hype was all about here. And yeah, that hype was warranted. It's almost a shock to me that the game's at number 3 actually. I did come to this list fully expecting to put the game at number 1. Far more than the original Metroid, this is the game that defines the intricacies, the exploration, the mood, the openness, everything that you come to expect from these open platformers that there are now so damn many of, is taken from the book of Super Metroid more than it is the original. There's the storytelling through the gameplay too, an area where this game is kind of hard to beat. You almost can't measure the game in hours. You could spend an absolute age on planet ZBs if you wanted to, exploring every inch of this world and trying to find every last one of the secrets. And of course you could spend enough time practicing and practicing to get all those secrets in 1 or 2 hours, or use all manner of tricks to break the game over your knee and run it in reverse. Still, simply playing this game for the first time was one of the best gaming experiences I've ever had. The classics quite often are up there for a bloody good reason. Castlevania was number 1 in the NES list, of course, and yet it's not my favourite Castlevania. Super Castlevania 4 is my favourite, and yet here it is at number 2 in the SNES list. Some might have a little giggle, I guess. This is certainly one of the more forgiving Vanias, seeing as how Simon can whip in all directions, which makes a huge difference. Even if this game does get quite vicious in the later levels, it sure doesn't have anything on the likes of Dracula's Curse or Wonder of Blood. But high difficulty is only one thing that makes a Castlevania. To me it's not quite as important as the gothic horror aesthetics, the all-time great soundtracks, and actually having wonderful levels and boss battles. Every second of this game is just so compelling, and that ending, that final freeze when the music comes in, is quite possibly the most beautiful moment on this whole platform. But before then, you've taken Simon on a truly epic journey, something that takes the original Castlevania and expands on it massively, making everything better. It was this close to the top spot. We could have easily had Castlevania on top of both the NES and SNES lists, and today it only just fell short. Well, I suppose I almost gave the game away when I wondered aloud if Mario could ever win anything, didn't I? I knew going into this list that number 1 was going to be either Castlevania, Metroid or Yoshi's Island, and I probably gave this the least chance of the trio. But when it came to actually putting the list together, this just seemed like the most natural fit. Why? Well, sometimes you've just got to go with the game that best defines the platform, and on a system where the best platformers and games are often less about direct action and more about exploration, secrets and wonder, the best fit is a game that in a way lets you explore the mind of a genius. Now of course it would be totally wrong to say that the game is purely Shigeru Miyamoto's creation. He's the producer, but many other brilliant people had a big hand in this. Still, the game's appearance, a whole load of childish scribbles essentially, is his direction, and there is nothing else like it on the system. The hand-drawn look is one thing of course, but play-wise the game's got everything your usual Mario game offers and then some. Tons of great platforming, tons of secrets, tons of creativity. Yoshi, the little dinosaur who wasn't necessarily welcomed after his debut in Super Mario World, is thoroughly legitimised here with his ability to eat everyone and then chuck those poor souls at everybody else in egg form, which obviously never gets old. Some may think that the yelps of Baby Mario may get old pretty quickly, but they do add a necessary bit of panic. You are supposed to be taking care of this little scrote after all. Again, I never played this back in the day, and again that just didn't matter at all. For me, this is the best Mario game, and really that's enough to give the plumber the number 1 that he most probably deserves. At least by way of the dinosaur that everybody hated at first sight. Hopefully you've enjoyed this SNES list. For now that's probably going to do it for console specific lists. It will soon be time to go back to the world of documentaries once more. However, I do have one last list for Christmas. And no, we won't be playing good games like Yoshi's Island. We'll be going entirely in the opposite direction. Oh dear. Bye for now. Thank you all so much for watching. Hopefully you are all doing very good indeed. If you like this video, please do like it, please do leave your comments, have a look at my social media, my Twitter, also have a look at my Patreon. You could join this list of very cool people indeed who are right here. Alexa Jones Gonzalez, Andrew Dalton, ArcadeLY Webmaster, Brian Henniger, Chris D. Xalior, Rimwon Sutter, Dagorath Dungeon Keeper, Danny Wolfers, David Matuszek, David Rose, Dinty76538, Douglas Miller, Dustin Cooper, Gary Samaden, Blunthef, J.S. Manchild, James Brown, Jace Alexander, Jeff Ladd, Johnny, Kid Cassette, Lukas Kuligowski, Mateusz Gramzow, Mike Clayton Travis, Martin Pataki, Nate Milbank, Piotr Margel, Ren Bimon, Robert D. Felice, Rod B, Rusty Kelly, Sam Stoddart, Seth A. Robinson, Simon Gulliver, Stuart Christopher Brownlee, Tariq Amir, Tim Wald, Tom K, Yoka Operator, and to all the rest of the awesome community, thank you so much and goodbye.